Hi, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Say, what do you think of memorabilia? Memorabilia. Memorabilia. Do you have boxes of memorabilia? You know what I mean. Old family photos, clippings from newspapers, and old school art that you did. I don't know, just little mementos, yearbooks from high school. Well, I spent the last couple of days sorting through my memorabilia, and I got to thinking, I don't know what's normal, what most people have. I had, here was my problem. I had, a reasonable amount, I thought. Not overdoing it. My mother had saved items from my early childhood, art and school papers and things like that. My high school letter from being on the basketball team. And, that's fine. I think that's perfectly normal, right? No problem. So there was a small box that my mother gave me many years ago. She said, well, here, you have this. I've been saving it. Okay, great, thanks. And I did the same over the years. If there were things I just didn't want to part with, a lot of letters, cards, which I guess isn't a thing anymore. As I was sorting through these things, I couldn't tell you how happy and grateful I was that I lived in a time when people wrote to each other, wrote cards and letters. Because I have to tell you, it really was kind of a nice experience going through these things and reading them again. Letters between myself and my mother and my siblings. Love letters to and from girlfriends. I mean, it was pretty nice. I found a couple of letters I decided not to save anymore. Doing a little life editing here. I had a couple of really angry letters from bad breakups. I had that too. Telling me what a monster I was. And those were tough to read because there might have been some truth in there. But here is my problem. The last couple times I moved, I'm a bit of a mover. I've moved every few years. I've been here, 10 years? Wow, that's a long time. Yeah, usually it's a year or two. I went through a period of just a year or two in a place and then off. I did that for a while. But so the last couple of moves, maybe 3 or 4 moves I made, I had a couple of large bins filled with this stuff. But here's the thing. A great deal of what filled those bins were just miscellaneous papers, old bills and taxes and receipts and just all sorts of mostly paperwork of one kind or another that required sorting. So it's one of my moving times, all right? So I really need to sort through this and thin it out. But, when you're moving, there's lots to do. So, all right, it's all there in the bin already. I'll just move it. So I basically moved a couple of bins worth of junk around for 3 or 4 moves. And that's what remained in my closet up until a couple of days ago. When I finally took it upon myself to, okay, let's do this once and for all. And I did, man. I wound up throwing out huge amounts of, I don't know how it ever got in there. But the problem was I couldn't just toss out the bin because there might be some really precious mementos in there or really important ones, which was the case. I found some really extraordinary things that I'd never want to throw away. Not only my memorabilia, but now things I saved from my children's early lives. I have 2 grown kids now. So I had no choice. I really had to painstakingly go through all of this, and it took a couple of days to throw out the junk and sift out the gems, which I did. So is this something you relate to? Do you save memorabilia? And do you look at it? In our digital age now, maybe this isn't going to be a thing anymore so much. Maybe this is really revealing my age, but it was really great to go through some of this. And it was also kind of draining and humbling. And I think the overarching feeling that I got when it was all said and done, that I was just so entirely sick of myself. Because my particular life was centered mainly in the arts. When I was young, I was a visual artist, both as a hobby and as a profession. So I had all this art. And so I have to decide, okay, well, what do I want to save? 20 years down the road, when I'm tottering around my house, what would I like to just sit and reminisce with and look through? Any of this? All of it? Some of it? So there's the visual art. And then for many years, I kind of split my time evenly between visual art and performing arts. So I did a lot of theater, a lot of music. And along with that comes clippings and posters and programs, cast photos and cards from directors and castmates. And, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of physical stuff that goes along with that life. So as a visual artist and a performing artist, again, both in hobby and profession, I was collecting too much. And then as my life progressed, it became more about radio. Those are kind of the three legs of my stool: visual arts, performing arts, and then radio. So now all of my saving is of the digital variety. And that's a lot easier to deal with. And it's a lot easier to move. I got a couple of external hard drives that I can just put in my pocket and walk down the stairs and not have to lug a big box. But I was just wondering if you had this experience too, and what you think about it, because I'm not sure what to think about it. Is it a good thing to save memorabilia and to look through it occasionally? I tend to think, yeah. I suppose you can overdo it. I think I've got it down to a very reasonable amount right now. I've got one small box of my kids' stuff, art, school papers, report cards, just things that, I think they'd like to have. So at some point, I'm just going to call them up and say, hey, I got a box here for you if you want it. If you don't, I'll toss it, but it's here if you want it. My daughter had a whole box of anime books that she just loved. My son, a big stack of comic books. So I saved those. But again, it's all in just a very reasonable sized box. My own personal stuff, from the early things that my mother saved on through the things that I saved. Again, just one very easy, liftable box. I think it's okay. But if you do have memorabilia in your house, and like me, it really needs a sorting, it needs a thinning, and you haven't done it for a long time, I want to both recommend that you do it, because it's a really interesting, enlightening experience to look at your own life. I also want to give you a little warning. It's not going to be easy. I can tell you from the things I saved, some of it was really painful. Like I mentioned, the really harsh letters. I got like 4 letters from this woman. We broke up, and she wasn't having it, man. She just laid me out in these letters, and I had to read them. I just had to. I couldn't not read them. And oh yeah, she may have a point here. I had a couple incidents in my life when I had some trouble with employers. A little conflict here and there. I had to go through arbitration on some unemployment that was being denied me because they claimed that I quit voluntarily. I won't go into the details. But there were a handful of times when I had to litigate something. And I saw in my papers that I had saved and I've now thrown away, I thought, no, I don't need to live this again. But, my side of the story, their side of the story. And it would have been nice if I'd read through this and said, oh yeah, they were really wrong and I was really right. But instead I kind of saw what a jerk I was. There were times in my life when I was really a jerk. It made me think of what we're doing right now, you and I, what we're doing together. I come in and I talk to you every day. And I couldn't help but wonder, when I go back, if I go back and listen to this program 20 years from now, am I just going to cringe with self-loathing? What an idiot. Because there's kind of no getting around it. When you're 40, looking back at 20, you're pretty much mostly seeing an idiot. And when you're 50 looking back at 30, and when you're 60 looking back at 40, I don't know. I don't know, man. Although on the bright side, I did find artwork and things I wrote. I did a lot of writing as well as a columnist for a while. I had an arts column. Anyway, some of it was damn good. I was real happy with it. Oh yeah, that's good. Some sketches. I thought, oh wow, that's really pretty good. So I guess it's a mix. I don't know. What's your experience with this? Have you sorted through your memorabilia? Do you have any at all? I'd love to know that about you. I don't think I ever have to worry about a time when I'll get caught up in the memorabilia, though, in the past. I don't see that ever happening for me. You hear about this, maybe you've seen it in your family or friends. There's, especially your older, maybe your parents or your grandparents. They seem to be sort of living in the past, and that's all they think about. I don't see that ever happening to me, because whenever I do spend time in that mind space, I tire of it very quickly. I get really pretty sick of it pretty fast. Like, no. This is enough of this. What's new? What's new? What's new on the horizon? What's going to happen tomorrow? What new projects am I going to tackle? And that might be a little allegory for life itself. The way we all have to think about progressing. Because we do. We need each other to progress in this world, right? And knowing our history and understanding our history and drawing from it, drawing lessons, admiring what worked, trying to bring it forward into our future plans, seeing what didn't work, admitting when we were jerks, jettisoning that old stuff, and try to do better in the future. Yeah, I think that's kind of a universal truth, isn't it? I mean, look at America. Born in the genocide of Native Americans. Built on the backs and the blood and the lives of enslaved Africans. I mean, talk about sorting through your boxes. But then there are things we did right. We invented baseball. The greatest game of all time. We invented jazz. The greatest music of all time. So, yeah, it's time to sort through America's boxes. Take a good long look. Sort and organize the things we want to keep. Take pride in what did work. Come to terms with what we did wrong. Jettison the ideas that don't work. And then move forward. Because just like a person never stops growing, never stops learning, at least they shouldn't stop growing and learning till the day they die. A country, all of us together, we got to keep growing. We got to keep learning. We can't just live in the back of that dusty, dark closet in a box of memories and old ideas. Taking a good hard look is both pleasure and pain. And I myself avoided it for years. I lugged those big heavy bins up and down stairs for half a dozen moves, and they just kept getting bigger and heavier. Until finally, a couple days ago, I thought, well, you know what? Let's just do this. That's what I want to recommend. I want to recommend for all of us. Well, speaking of recommendations, you know that one of my favorite things to do is to share really great pieces with you. So I got two recommendations for you today. They're both on the Facebook page. By the way, you really should like the Facebook page. Not that I need to have 1 million likes and followers. I mean, it'd be nice. But I really try to share important, relevant, enlightening articles with you. I really try to give you the best of the best. And we only talk about them briefly on the air, and I can never do them justice. So I really recommend, go to Charles Purcell on Facebook. Of course, this show is always posted every day in the feed, and then the articles I share. So here's one I'm recommending today. It's from the Chronicle of Social Change. Children and Youth, Front and Center. Shared by one of my favorite Facebook friends. She's an excellent aggregator. Is that a word? Aggregator? To aggregate. It's not a member of the alligator family. It's an aggregator. Anyway, here it is. The title is Abolishing Policing Also Means Abolishing Family Regulation. Now, this is something I hadn't thought about. My friend, she lives out in Oakland, California. She's very much into this sort of thing, and she's an advocate and an activist. Let me read just the first couple paragraphs to you, and then invite you to read the whole thing. Again, posted on my Facebook page. The author, I want to give credit here, Dorothy Roberts. The uprisings taking place across the nation and the world have brought unprecedented attention to abolition as a political vision and organizing strategy. More Americans are recognizing that police killings of black people are so pervasive that they can no longer be considered aberrations. Rather, police violence stems from the very function of policing to enforce an unjust racial order. Policing, therefore, cannot be fixed by more failed reforms. It must be abolished. The most prominent demand emerging from the protests is to defund the police and reallocate the money to provide health care, education, jobs with living wages, and affordable housing. I am inspired by calls to defund the police, but I am concerned by recommendations to transfer money, resources, and authority from the police to Health and Human Services agencies that handle Child Protective Services, CPS. Now she's getting into an area that I'm not as familiar with, and I'm very grateful to learn these things. These proposals ignore how the misnamed child welfare system, like the misnamed criminal justice system, is designed to regulate and punish black and other marginalized people. It could be more accurately referred to as the family regulation system. Giving child welfare authorities more money and power will result in even more state surveillance and control of black communities. Rather than divesting one oppressive system to invest in another, we should work toward abolishing all carceral institutions and creating radically different ways of meeting families' needs. Defunding police is part of a broader struggle to abolish the prison industrial complex, including jails, prisons, detention centers, and other carceral practices, while building a radically different society that has no need for them. From its origins in slave patrols, policing has served as a violent arm of the racial capitalist state by protecting the interests of white elites and controlling black and other marginalized communities through everyday physical intimidation and arrests. So there you get the idea where she's going. This is an excellent article. I recommend it. I would love for you to read it. I'm just so pleased when I find smart people writing well about important things. By the way, Dorothy Roberts is, reading her bio here, a university professor of Africana Studies, Law and Sociology, and professor of civil rights at the University of Pennsylvania. All right, good for you. Excellent, excellent. There is so much out there, you guys. And it can be daunting to the point of, I just can't take it anymore, right? I understand that. I get the same feeling. And especially when a lot of it is just the same old kind of drivel and the same old talking points and the same old boilerplate right-left arguments. So when I find something really valuable, I'm so happy to share it. And there's one. And I have one more recommendation for you today. And let's see, it is this. Andrew Bacevich is at it again. If you don't know Andrew Bacevich, he is a professor of history and international relations at Boston University. Also a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy and served in the armed forces for a long time. And he's an important voice. He really surfaced a few years ago, commenting mostly on the Bush years, Iraq and all that. And if memory serves, I think his son died in the so-called War on Terror. Anyway, Andrew Bacevich has become a really important voice. And this article I'm going to recommend includes his interview with Bill Moyers in January of this year. And he writes this. Martin Luther King's giant triplets. Racism, yes. But what about militarism and materialism? And again, I'm just going to read you the first couple of paragraphs and invite you to see the rest. This is from BillMoyers.com. In the wake of the police killing of George Floyd, Americans are finally, or is it once again, confronting the racism that afflicts this country and extends into just about every corner of our national life. Something fundamental just might be happening. Yet, to state the obvious, we've been here before. Mass protests in response to racial inequality and discrimination, including police brutality, have been anything but unknown in the United States. Much the same can be said of riots targeting black Americans, fomented and exploited by white racists, often actively or passively abetted by local law enforcement officials. If Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin, formerly known as H. Rap Brown, was correct in calling violence as American as cherry pie, then race-related urban unrest is the apple-filled equivalent. The optimists among us believe that this time is different. I hope events will prove them right. Yet recalling expectations that Barack Obama's election in 2008 signaled the dawn of a post-racial America, I see no reason to expect it to be so. A yawning gap, I fear, separates hope from reality. Let me suggest, however, that the nation's current preoccupation with race, as honorable and necessary as it may be, falls well short of adequately responding to the situation confronting Americans as they enter the third decade of the 21st century. Racism is a massive problem, but hardly our only one. Indeed, as Martin Luther King sought to remind us many years ago, there are at least two others of comparable magnitude. In April 1967, at New York City's Riverside Church, Dr. King delivered a sermon that offered a profound diagnosis of the illnesses afflicting the nation. His analysis remains as timely today as it was then, perhaps more so. Americans remember King primarily as a great civil rights leader, and indeed he was that. In his Riverside Church address, however, he turned to matters that went far beyond race. In an immediate sense, his focus was the ongoing Vietnam War, which he denounced as madness that must cease. Yet King also used the occasion to summon the nation to undergo a radical revolution of values that would transform the United States from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. Only through such a revolution, he declared, would we be able to overcome the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. So I'm going to invite you to read the rest. I think this is really important. Yeah, I think this is well worth our consideration. You know me, I'm ranting about consumerism all the time. The idea that we're set up to be a thing-oriented society, as King put it, to make those connections between racism, to understand how capitalism relies on racism, and how militarism is just an extension. I mean, the parallels are just so starkly evident, with local police surveilling and occupying neighborhoods of color, committing violence almost as a policy. Well, that describes the U.S. military as well, surveilling and occupying the globe, using intimidation and violence as a policy. They couldn't be more directly parallel. Abolish the police, abolish the military in the same sense. In other words, stop using it as your own personal brute force. It's one thing to defend the nation. Every nation has to defend itself. It's quite another to deploy imperial forces around the entire globe to enforce your will and to subjugate the poor and people of color. It's what the police do domestically, and it's what the military does internationally. And what are they protecting? Well, of course, they're protecting the ever-expanding need for resources and labor to facilitate the production of this endless conveyor belt of consumer goods, creating this thing-oriented society, because production and consumption and all the money trickling up through the financial system and the big banks is what feeds the belly of the capitalists. But they've got to keep convincing us that that's how the world is supposed to work. So the boot of capitalism is on the neck of poor and marginalized Americans, separated by race, by class, by design, in order to take away freedom, in order to force labor. And internationally, that boot is on the neck of marginalized people for the same reason. Martin Luther King called them the giant triplets: racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. This goes on at length. Again, Andrew Bacevich. So there you go. A couple of articles to recommend. All right, let's call it a day, shall we? Always enjoy talking to you. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell. We'll do it again tomorrow.